In the late 1930s, companies were offering more for less, or sometimes less for less, in attempts to survive the Great Depression. But many didn't. The American Bantam, introduced in 1936, was about as entry-level as was offered in the U.S., being priced from just under $300 up to around $385, typically 128 to 129 inches long on a 75-inch wheelbase, and weighing 1,000 to 1,100 pounds, with power coming from a 46 cubic inch or 747 cc inline 4 with 13 horsepower. First-year sales were under 500, but would leap up to over 3,500 for 1937. The Willys of 1937 was one of the few other American cars that still offered a four-cylinder. Priced between $500 and $600, it was comparatively larger, at 175 inches long on a 100-inch wheelbase, weighing 2,100 to 2,300 pounds. Its 134 cubic inch 2.2-liter made 48 horsepower. Sales for the year were near 65,000. Ford remained the top seller with sales over 940,000 for 1937. Prices ranged from $530 to $860, and it was 183 inches long on a 112-inch wheelbase, and 2,300 to 2,900 pounds, offered with a 60 horsepower 2.2-liter 136 or 85 horsepower 3.6-liter 221 V8. Plymouth had well established itself as the number 3 brand by this time, selling more than 550,000 for the year. Priced from $580 to $1,100, it was typically 184 inches long on a 114-inch wheelbase and 2,800 to 3,400 pounds, but other wheelbases were available. Power came from a 201 cubic inch, or 3.3-liter straight six, providing 82 horsepower. 1936 would be the final year of the revived Lafayette as its own make, being merged into Nash the next year. Prices started under $600. Wheelbases were typically 113 or 117, with most using a 218 cubic inch, or 3.6-liter straight six, for 75 horsepower. The Terraplane was its own brand from 1934 to 1937, as it transitioned from being an Essex model to a Hudson, selling 90,000 its last solo year. It was priced from $600 to $900, was 198 inches long on a 117-inch wheelbase, and weighed 2,400 to 2,900 pounds. The 212 cubic inch 3.5-liter straight six provided 96 to 102 horsepower. Chevrolets of the same year were $620 to $800, 185 inches long on a 112-inch wheelbase, and weighed 2,800 to 3,000 pounds. The 3.5-liter 216 cubic inch stove bolt 6 produced 85 horsepower, and sales were roughly 815,000. The 1936 Studebaker ranged from $665 to $1,100 on a 116 to 125-inch wheelbase, and weighed 2,900 to 3,600 pounds. Engine choices were a 3.6-liter 218 cubic inch straight six with 90 horsepower, or a 4.1-liter 250 cubic inch straight 8 with 115 horsepower. Sales for the year were over 55,000. Grahams for 1937 were $690 to $1,200 and were offered on 111, 116, and 120-inch wheelbases, and weighed 2,700 to 3,200 pounds. The straight six was offered in 170, 199, or 218 cubic inches, with optional superchargers, for 70 to 116 horsepower, selling 18,000 for the year. The Dodge of 1937 was typically 196 to 203 inches long on a 115-inch wheelbase, but a 132-inch wheelbase version was made for commercial and taxi use. Sales for the year were just under 300,000. Prices could range from $715 to $1,200, and weight from 2,900 to 3,400 pounds. The engine was a 3.6-liter 218 straight six with 87 horsepower. 1936 was the last full year of Auburn. Prices ranged from $750 to $2,200 on 120 to 127-inch wheelbases, and weight ranged from 3,100 to 4,100 pounds. The straight 8 was offered in 210 or 280 cubic inches, or 3.4 and 4.6 liters, for 86 or 115 horsepower, or 150 horsepower in supercharged form. Sales were just over 1,800. The 1937 DeSoto cost $770 to $1,300, was 193 inches long on a 116-inch wheelbase as a two-door, but longer versions were available. Weight was 3,000 to 3,500 pounds. Power came from a 228 or 3.7 liter straight six with 93 horsepower, and sales for the year were over 80,000. Pontiacs of the same year were $780 to $1,200 on 117 to 122 inch wheelbase, and 3,200 to 3,500 pounds, using either a 223 straight six for 85 horsepower or a 249 straight 8 for 100 horsepower, and sales were over 235,000. 1936 would be the final year Rio produced passenger cars before moving fully into commercial trucks, with only 3,200 made for the year. Prices were $795 to $895, wheelbases were 115 and 118, and weight was 3,300 to 3,600 pounds. The straight six came in 228 or 268 cubic inches per 90 or 95 horsepower. The Hupmobile of 1936 was $795 to $1,250 on 118 or 121 inch wheelbase, and weighed 2,900 to 3,400 pounds. Power came from a 245 or 4 liter straight six with 101 horsepower, or a 5 liter 303 cubic inch straight 8 with 120 horsepower. Sales were under 2,200. Oldsmobile for 1937 offered cars from $810 to $1,100 on 117 or 124 inch wheelbases, and weight ranged from 3,200 to 3,500 pounds. Engines were a 230 cubic inch straight six with 95 horsepower, or a 4.1 liter 257 straight 8 with 110 horsepower. Sales were over 205,000, while Chryslers ranged from $810 for the base Royal to nearly $2,200 for an Imperial, with total sales over 105,000. Wheelbases were 116, 121, 128, 133, and 140 inches, with weight ranging from 3,000 to 4,600 pounds. Power could be provided by a 228 straight six with 93 to 100 horsepower, or an 110 to 115 horsepower 274, or 130 to 138 horsepower 324 8. Hudsons were $865 to $1,300 on 122 to 129 inch wheelbases, and 2,800 to 3,300 pounds, selling roughly 20,000 for the year. Engines were a 212 cubic inch six for 101 to 107 horsepower, or a 255 straight 8 with 122 to 128 horsepower. The Nash Ambassador of 1936 was 204 inches long on 125 inch wheelbase, weighing 3,000 to 3,800 pounds, and costing $885 to $1,000. It could be had with a 93 horsepower 265 straight six, or 102 horsepower 261 straight 8, with total Nash sales for the year being under 45,000. Buicks for 1937 started at over $900 and climbed to over $2,300, offered on 122, 126, 131, and 138 inch wheelbases. The overhead valve straight 8 came in 4.1 liter 248 with 100 horsepower, or 5.2 liter 320 with 130 horsepower. Sales for the year were 220,000. Mercury was introduced as an upmarket alternative to Ford in 1939, starting at $950 to $1,000. It was 196 inches long on 116 inch wheelbase, weighing 3,000 pounds, and powered by a 3.9 liter 239 V8 with 95 horsepower. First year sales were 75,000. A Packard in 1936 could range from $1,100 to $5,000, offered on 120, 127, 132, 134, 139, or 144 inch wheelbase, and weighed 3,500 to 6,000 pounds. Straight 8s came in 282, 320, or 385 cubic inches for 120 to 150 horsepower. Or one could opt for the 7.8 liter or 473 cubic inch twin 6 or V12 for 175 horsepower. More than 60,000 Packards sold for the year. Lincoln introduced the much smaller and cheaper Zephyr in 1936, starting at only $1,300. It was 203 inches long on 122 inch wheelbase and 3,300 pounds, powered by a smaller 4.4 liter 267 V12 for 110 horsepower. Just under 15,000 were sold for the year. The LaSalle of 1937 was typically between $1,300 and $1,700 and 201 inches long on 124 inch wheelbase, weighing 3,700 to 3,900 pounds. The Cadillac V8 was 322 cubic inches, or 5.3 liters, providing 125 horsepower. Sales for the year were around 32,000. The actual Cadillacs of the same year were $1,700 to $9,200 on 124, 131, 138, or 154-inch wheelbases, and 3,700 to 4,600 pounds, with sales under 15,000. Engine options were 135 horsepower 346 or 5.7-liter V8, 150 horsepower 368 or 6-liter V12, and an 185 horsepower 452 cubic inch or 7.4-liter V16. 1937 was the last year of the front-wheel drive Cord and was priced from $2,500 to $3,600. The uniquely styled car was offered on 125 and 132-inch wheelbases and weighed 3,700 to 4,200 pounds. Power came from a 4.7-liter 289 V8 producing 125 horsepower, or 190 horsepower with the optional supercharger. Sales were just over 1,100. The Pierce Arrow would also end production in 1937. It was priced from $3,200 to $6,500 on 139, 144, or 147-inch wheelbases, weighing 5,600 to 6,100 pounds. Engines were a 385 cubic inch, or 6.3-liter straight 8, with 150 horsepower, or a 462 cubic inch, or 7.6-liter V12, with 185 horsepower. It is estimated 166 were made for the year. When AC/DC shuttered their factory in 1937, that included ending production of the Duesenberg, with fewer than 500 made for the decade. A car that was typically custom-bodied on a 142-inch wheelbase and powered by a Lycoming dual overhead cam 420 cubic inch straight 8 with 280 horsepower, with prices between $12,000 and $17,000 to start. But these prices could go much higher for things such as the 320 horsepower optional supercharged version, or the 154-inch wheelbase limousine, or the short 125-inch wheelbase sport version. Britain had the Austin 10 starting between 155 and 170 pounds. It was 139 inches long on a 93-inch wheelbase and weighed 1,700 pounds. The 1.1-liter inline-4 produced 30 horsepower, and nearly 300,000 were made between 1932 and 1947. The Hillman Minx Magnificent of 1936 was 153 inches long on a 93-inch wheelbase, weighing 2,000 pounds. Its 1,200cc 4 also made 30 horsepower. Standard's Flying 8 of 1938 was 139 inches long on an 83-inch wheelbase and powered by a 31 horsepower 1-liter 4. Prices range from 125 to 160 pounds. Morgan introduced the 4.4 in 1936. It was 124 inches long on a 92-inch wheelbase and powered by a 1.1-liter Coventry Climax inline 4 with 34 horsepower. Nearly 700 would be built by decade's end. The Sunbeam Talbot 10 was 156 inches long on a 94-inch wheelbase, using a 1.2-liter 4 for 35 horsepower. More than 7,000 would be made. The Singer 11 initially cost 240 pounds. It was 160 inches long on a 100-inch wheelbase, weighing 2,200 pounds. The 1.4-liter, or 85 cubic inch engine produced 37 horsepower, while the Lanchester 10 was updated for 1936, being 158 inches long on a 103-inch wheelbase, and using a 1.4-liter inline 4 producing 38 horsepower. The MGTA was 140 inches long on a 75-inch wheelbase, with a 1.3-liter overhead valve inline 4 with 50 horsepower. Prices started at over 220 pounds. Rover's 12 started between 280 and 300 pounds, was 172 inches long on a 112-inch wheelbase, and its 53 horsepower came from a 1.5-liter overhead valve inline 4. The Alvis Firebird was 173 inches long on a 118-inch wheelbase and powered by a 1.8-liter inline 4 with 55 horsepower. Fewer than 500 were made. The Riley 12.4 was typically 162 inches long on a 112-inch wheelbase, but other variations were offered. Power came from a 1.5-liter, making 51 to 61 horsepower. For 1938, Daimler sold the new 15, starting at 485 pounds, 180 inches long on a 114-inch wheelbase. It was powered by a 2.5-liter inline 6 with 66 horsepower. Fewer than 3,000 in total were made. The Humber Snipe of 1938 was 175 inches long and 114-inch wheelbase, using a 3.2-liter straight six, producing 75 horsepower. Vauxhall's Big Six was 170 to 184 inches long on 111 to 130-inch wheelbase, with a 2.4 or 3.2-liter straight six with 20 to 27 taxable horsepower, or up to an actual 80 horsepower. While the Morris Big Six was 189 inches long on 117-inch wheelbase and around 3,200 pounds. Engines came in 2.3, 2.9, or 3.5 liter, with 16 to 25 taxable horsepower, or up to 86 actual horsepower. The 1938 Rolls-Royce Wraith was 203 inches long on 136-inch wheelbase and powered by a 4.3-liter inline six with an estimated 115 horsepower. The Lagonda V12 was typically 206 inches long on 124-inch wheelbase, but 132 and 138-inch wheelbase versions were available. Its 4.5-liter produced 180 horsepower, but priced near $9,000, fewer than 200 were made. The SS Jaguar Mark IV could be 173 to 186 inches long on 113 to 120-inch wheelbase, and was offered as a 1.5, 2.5, or 3.5 liter, with horsepower ranging from 50 to 125 horsepower. Bentleys of 1936 started at over 1,500 pounds and were 172 to 192 inches long, typically on a 126-inch wheelbase. Offered as a 3.5 or 4.5 liter, it could have 110 to 175 horsepower. In France, the Simca 5 cost 14,000 francs and was 127 inches long on a 79-inch wheelbase, weighing 1,200 pounds. Using a 570cc inline 4 with 13 horsepower, it tested at better than 51 miles per gallon. Introduced in 1937, the Renault Juve cost 16,000 francs and was 146 inches long on a 93-inch wheelbase, weighing 1,700 to 2,100 pounds. Initially powered by a 1,000cc side valve engine with 23 horsepower. Peugeot's 202 arrived a year later, initially 174 inches long on a 104-inch wheelbase and 2,000 pounds, using an 1100 producing 30 horsepower. The Delahaye 134 was typically 181 inches long on a 116-inch wheelbase, but longer 124-inch wheelbase versions were available. Its 2.2-liter inline 4 was perhaps underrated at 50 horsepower, but only 340 would be made. The front-wheel drive Citroën Traction Avant was introduced in 1934 as the 7 and 11, 175 inches long on a 115-inch wheelbase, and around 2,300 pounds. It initially used a 1.3 or 1.9-liter inline 4 with 32 to 56 horsepower. Le Panhard et Levasseur Dynamic was introduced in 1936. It could be 187 to 203 inches long on 102, 110, or 118-inch wheelbase, with power coming from a 75 horsepower 3.8-liter straight six. More than 2,700 were eventually made. Talbot Lago was made in a variety of lengths, typically on a 116-inch wheelbase, and offered with a 2.3-liter 4 or an inline 6 of 2.7, 3, or 4 liters. Prices usually were between 57 to 73,000 francs, with horsepower between 75 and 105, although there were performance options that could raise output as high as 140. And the smaller SST 150 Teardrop was 188 inches long on a 104-inch wheelbase and up to 200 horsepower. In 1936, the Delage D8 100 was usually custom-bodied and could exceed 30,000 francs, or $18,000 in the U.S. Built on 132 to 143-inch wheelbases, the 4.3-liter straight 8 could have anywhere from 90 to 120 horsepower. The Bugatti Type 57 was made from 1934 to 1940, with more than 700 produced. They were custom-bodied on a 130-inch wheelbase, and power came from a 3.3-liter dual overhead cam, 198 cubic inch straight 8 with 135 horsepower, or supercharged for 160 to 200 horsepower. Spain saw the end of Hispano-Suiza in 1937 with the K6. A bare chassis started at over $1,300 before being custom-bodied on a 130 to 146-inch wheelbase. Power came from a 5.2-liter 6 producing 120 to 140 horsepower. In Germany, the front-wheel drive DKW F7 was 157 inches long on a 103-inch wheelbase and under 1,700 pounds. It used a 600 or 700cc two-stroke twin for 18 or 20 horsepower. The rear-engine air-cooled KDF Type 1, introduced in 1938, would become the Volkswagen Beetle after the war. It was 161 inches long on a 94-inch wheelbase and around 1,800 pounds, with an 1,100cc horizontally opposed 4, producing approximately 24 horsepower. 600 were made. The Hansa 1100 was 161 inches long on a 106-inch wheelbase and 2,400 pounds. Its overhead valve inline 4 produced 28 horsepower. The Adler Trumpf was also front-wheel drive and cost 3,700 to 4,500 marks. It was 179 inches long on a 115-inch wheelbase, powered by a 1.7-liter providing 37 horsepower. Wanderer's W24 was typically 170 inches long on a 100-inch wheelbase, but a long wheelbase version was available. Its 1.4-liter inline 4 made 41 horsepower, and 23,000 would be made before 1940. The BMW 326 was 180 inches long on a 113-inch wheelbase and weighed 2,400 pounds. It used a 2-liter overhead valve straight 6 for 50 horsepower. Around 16,000 would be made. The Opel Super 6 was 172 inches long on a 104-inch wheelbase and 2,500 pounds, unless one opted for the long wheelbase limousine. The 2.5-liter overhead valve engine had 55 horsepower. The Mercedes-Benz Type 230 of 1938 started at 4,200 marks and was 189 inches long on a 120-inch wheelbase, weighing 3,000 pounds. Its 2.2-liter straight 6 made 55 horsepower, and more than 20,000 would be made. Audi's 920 could be 190 to 200 inches long on 122 to 130-inch wheelbases and weigh 2,600 to 3,600 pounds. Power came from a 3.3-liter straight 6 with 74 horsepower. The 800 series Horsch was typically 209 inches long on a 136-inch wheelbase and 5,700 pounds, using a 4.9-liter straight 8 with 100 to 120 horsepower. Then there was the Mercedes 540K. Starting at 28,000 marks, it came on 117, 130, and 153-inch wheelbases, and could weigh up to 6,000 pounds. Its 5.4-liter straight 8 produced 115 horsepower, or it could be supercharged for 180 horsepower. Just over 400 were made. Italy had the Fiat 1500, 176 inches long on 110-inch wheelbase, and weighing 2,100 pounds, using a small straight 6, producing 44 horsepower. Lancia's Astura was 191 inches long on a 137-inch wheelbase and near 3,900 pounds, with a 2.9-liter V8 providing 82 horsepower. The Alfa Romeo 8C 2900 was offered on 107, 110, and 118-inch wheelbases. The street version of its supercharged dual overhead cam V8 produced 180 horsepower. The Czech Skoda Popular of 1937 started at 148 inches long on a 96-inch wheelbase and weighed 1,600 to 1,800 pounds. The new overhead valve 1-liter inline 4 made for 27 horsepower. Introduced in 1936, the Tatra 87 was 187 inches long on a 112-inch wheelbase and 3,000 pounds. The 3-liter V8 initially produced 75 horsepower. The Swedish Volvo PV was on a 113-inch wheelbase and was 177 inches long, weighing 3,400 pounds. Its 3.7-liter straight 6 made 86 horsepower. Less than 3,000 of the series were built. The Soviet Gaz M1 was based on the Model A Ford and was 182 inches long on a 112-inch wheelbase, weighing 3,000 to 3,200 pounds, using a 3.3-liter inline 4 with 49 horsepower. While the ZIS 101 was 226 inches long on a 142-inch wheelbase and 5,600 to 6,500 pounds. Its 5.8-liter 351 cubic inch overhead valve straight 8 was based on the Buick design, initially with 110 horsepower. Oda Jidosha was Japan's largest car manufacturer in the 30s, making a car that was 126 inches long on an 85-inch wheelbase and 1,500 pounds. It used a 736cc 4 for 12 horsepower. The Datsun Type 16 was 123 inches long on a 79-inch wheelbase and 1,300 pounds. The 722cc inline 4 produced the 16 horsepower of its name. Toyota began car production in 1936 with the AA, 187 inches long on a 112-inch wheelbase and 3,700 pounds. The engine was a 3.4-liter, 207 cubic inch copy of the Chevy Stovebolt for 62 horsepower. But even these newly formed companies would soon be winding down production as the Second World War expanded. So as always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to comment below and like and subscribe.